You know what's strange? We talk about boomers endlessly. We can't stop analyzing millennials, their burnout, their housing crisis, their complicated relationship with avocado toast. And Gen Z gets treated like a fascinating new species worth dissecting from every possible angle. But there's this entire generation sitting right in the middle. They built the internet, raised their kids largely on their own, and watched every institution they were told to trust collapse in real time. Nobody's really talking about them. That's Gen X. And that silence might actually tell you everything you need to know about their psychology. There's a reason for that silence, and it starts with cultural gravity. Boomers have it. They rewrote the economy, the workplace, the family structure. Millennials have the cultural spotlight. Their financial anxiety alone generated an entire media industry. Gen Z has the attention economy. Every generation has a narrative built around them. Gen X has a reputation for not needing one. And psychologically, that is the most interesting thing about them. The first thing researchers point to is something called the latchkey effect. Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old. You come home from school. The door is locked. No one is there. No smartphone. No Ring camera. No way for anyone to know if you're okay. You let yourself in. Make yourself a snack. Do your homework alone, and wait. By 1984, approximately 7 million American children between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school, a number historians William Strauss and Neil Howe documented as unprecedented in modern American history. Not because their parents were negligent, because the world changed faster than the support systems could follow. Dual-income households became the norm. Divorce rates peaked. Nobody designed a safety net for a generation that would have to build its own. So they did. And they stopped waiting for someone to come home and check on them. Self-reliance wasn't a value Gen X chose. It was the operating system they installed because the alternative wasn't available. And that wiring never fully switched off. Here's something that gets misread constantly about this generation. They don't post much. They don't seek validation the same way. They're not trying to build a personal brand. And for a generation that watched social media turn into a full-time performance, most of them scrolled past and kept working. People read that as disengagement, as being behind, as not getting it. That's not what it is. Pew Research Center data shows Gen X has significantly lower rates of very active social media engagement compared to both millennials and Gen Z. But here's what nobody says. That's not avoidance. That's a generation that built an internal validation system before external validation even had a platform. They stopped needing witnesses before anyone invented a reason to become one. They also don't trust systems easily. And that's not cynicism. That's pattern recognition. They watched divorce rates peak when they were in grade school. They watched corporations downsize the moment loyalty became inconvenient. The youngest Gen Xers graduated college right into the dot-com crash. The oldest ones were hitting their career stride when the 2008 financial crisis arrived. The APA's annual stress report has consistently ranked Gen X among the highest in institutional distrust across all generational cohorts. Not because they're broken, because they paid attention, and what they saw confirmed what the latchkey years had already taught them. A Gen X manager told his team something once that stayed with a younger colleague for years. The colleague was frustrated the company had shifted direction without warning, after months of promises. "I thought they had our backs," he said. The manager looked at him and said, "Nobody has your back. That's not dark, that's just the map. Build something that doesn't need them to." Not harsh, not cynical, just someone who had read the landscape enough times to stop being surprised by it. But here's the question worth sitting with. There's a difference between self-sufficiency and a wall built so high that nobody gets in anymore. Both look identical from the outside. Both get called strength. The question isn't whether Gen X is resilient enough. The question is whether resilient enough has ever gotten lonely. Right now, most Gen X adults are carrying weight from two directions simultaneously. Researcher Dr. Karen Fingerman at the University of Texas has spent years studying what she calls the sandwich generation adults, simultaneously supporting aging parents and raising children, often at the peak of their own career demands. Gen X didn't invent that position. They just filled it without making noise about it. They're the ones on the early flight home when the call comes. The ones balancing the college fund and the assisted living payment in the same spreadsheet. No one made a documentary. No platform built a hashtag around it. They just do it. And then there's this. They've adapted more times than any generation before them before adapting became something you put on a resume. Analog to digital, pager to smartphone, office to remote. Every time the floor shifted, they adjusted their footing and kept moving. Gallup Workplace research consistently shows Gen X scoring highest among generational cohorts on self-direction and adaptability. They didn't get a transition seminar. They didn't demand one. If you're a Gen X man, you probably absorbed something in your 20s that no one explicitly taught you. That asking for help was weakness. That handling it yourself was the only real option. Not because someone sat you down and said it, but because the culture ran on that assumption, quietly and consistently. So you became capable of almost everything, and vocal about almost nothing. Deeply functional. Occasionally, deeply alone. If you're a Gen X woman, you were handed a different version of the same script, told you could have it all, shown very few examples of what that actually looked like, and left to figure out the gap on your own. Follow for more on the psychology of quiet intensity. Every structure has parts you never see. The load-bearing walls, the foundations poured before the first floor went up. Nobody photographs them. Nobody puts them on the cover. Nobody writes think pieces about what they're holding. But take them out, and everything above collapses. Gen X built the load-bearing walls. They're still holding. Which sign hit closest to home? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you know a Gen X person in your life who's never had this put into words before, send this to them. Sometimes just hearing it explained changes everything.